Hi, Ray Dickey from Association Help Now. And a lot of you also know me from a couple different CI chapters, but thank you so much for being here today. We've got a couple precise topics. We're going to do new regulations and facades. We're going to talk about underwriting changes, and then we're going to talk about what is considered a legal emergency. And then Tom is going to be here to give away a gift card. So before I have our panel introduce themselves, if you are here for CEUs, I am launching a poll. Don't worry, if I close the poll before you have time to fill it out, you can use your chat or question feature. That's how you're going to stay in touch with us today. Please, I'm begging you, send me messages, send me questions, send me comments. I do not use people's last names. I'll make a disclaimer that I could. So if you're that worried about it, maybe think twice. But you should be fairly confident to go ahead and send me any questions or comments you have. And like I said, I don't even use first names if it's even kind of debatable. So anyway, all right, so let's have our panel introduce themselves before we get started. And let's start with who I see first, and that is Joe.
Hi, I'm Joe DiPompeo. My company is Structural Workshop, and we are structural engineers based in New Jersey. We have an office in Pennsylvania also.
Excellent. And Scott?
My name is Scott Barieski, and I own a company called South Shore Construction. We're located in Roselle, New Jersey, perform structural repairs and maintenance to the exterior facades of buildings, plaza decks, and also parking garages.
And I see Dawn, but no parrots today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dawn Becker-Durnin. I'm a community insurance risk management specialist. I'm an insurance agent in Community Association Insurance. We are People First. We are headquartered in Easton, Pennsylvania. However, we provide insurance primarily on the East Coast. We're part of Acroshore.
And Dave.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Byrne. I am an attorney, the chairperson of my law firm's Community Association Condominium Co-op Practice Group. My firm is Ansel Grimm & Aaron. We have offices throughout New Jersey, an office in White Plains, New York, and one in Pennsylvania. Good to see everybody.
And Tom is here.
Hi, Tom Asciola from Apex Air Duct Cleaning and Chimney Services. We specialize in fire prevention services such as air duct cleaning, dry vent cleaning, and chimney services.
All right, so we're going to start with our first topic, and I'm going to ask Joe and Scott to stay, and Dawn and Dave and Tom will join us back shortly. And guys, before we get started, I got a short poll to ask the audience. Can you see any visible cracking or degradation from the street? Can you see any of that in regard to your building? I'm curious. So Joe, what do you think the audience is going to answer?
Probably none or a little.
Okay. And then what about you, Greg?
Scott?
Scott, geez, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. You know what? It's probably there, and they probably have never really looked for it.
All right, so 54% said no, but 46% said a little. So this is going to be a really good topic for them at the very least. Now, Joe, what kind of brought this up is something that happened in Jersey City, New Jersey, but we're going to talk and broaden it a little bit. But why don't we get started with that? What happened that prompted this topic today?
As you know, as you may know, New York City has had what's called Local Law 11 for years now, and the purpose of that is it's safety of pedestrians essentially. It's requires inspections of buildings over a certain height and a certain size, and it's basically to prevent things from falling off the buildings and landing on the street. There has been incidents through the years that prompted this. New York City really was one of the only jurisdictions that did anything like this. And then after the Surfside incident a year ago in Florida, some other jurisdictions started looking at other types of regulations. And Jersey City recently put one in that requires two types of inspections. One is a full structural inspection on any concrete building 6 stories or more. And then the second is a facade inspection on any building, period, 6 stories or more, or any masonry building with a masonry facade 4 stories or more. And it's similar to Local Law 11 in New York, where you have to have an engineer or architect do the inspection and submit the report to the city building department on a regular schedule.
So is it a fair statement to say that cities are getting really tough on taking a look at these buildings?
Jurisdictions, yes. It's not necessarily cities, sometimes it's counties. There's other counties in Florida that have started to adopt regulations, and it can be at the county level, it can be at the state level, it can be at the city level, but it's certainly a little bit. But I think once the report on Surfside comes out and any changes to the codes and regulations from what we learned from that are known, I think there'll be a lot more of this going on throughout the country.
So Scott, I'm getting reports, and I already know of a couple high rises where the city came, they had some cracks and they had a little bit of debris. They always had debris a little bit, but all of a sudden they had to spend hundreds of $1,000s in scaffolding because these city inspectors are getting tough. Do you think that's a trend that's going to continue, Scott? And I want you to also talk a little bit, is a crack a problem or is it not a problem?
Well, I mean, so a couple things like, so one of the most expensive aspects of these jobs are the scaffolding, right? So that's that means like the exterior access to even get to the work, to either do the inspections or actually perform the work, where you literally see the people hanging off the side of the building. And then another type of scaffolding that's pretty common is also, we would call it like bridging. And that's the stuff that you see in New York City that they have around, where everybody's walking underneath some sort of a steel structure that prevents the stuff from above from falling on your head. So those two things combined can actually add up to a lot of dollars in upfront costs, regardless of the amount of repairs that you have. But as far as cracking is concerned, it's like, well, all cracking is some sort of a concern that even if it's not a structural thing that it's going to fall apart right away, it's almost like I like to call like a crack a superhighway. That it allows like a lot more moisture and things like that to get more easily into the concrete and start to rust your rebar, which will eventually create some of that spalling of the concrete that could fall to the ground or something to that effect. But not every crack is some sort of a major defect that you need to have like immediate repairs performed.
And Joe, when Scott says a lot of dollars, we're talking here tens of thousands, even over hundreds of thousands of dollars if you do need to get scaffolding and start a process, correct, Joe?
It can be. I mean, we've had projects where the scaffolding was, 50% or more of the total project costs. We've had projects where the scaffolding cost killed or delayed the project because, they got an estimate for the work based on the quantities of work. And then when they factor in the overhead, for a lot of things, but the scaffolding is the biggest component of it. And scaffolding can get very tricky too. If you have a tight situation where you have to hang off a parapet that's not strong enough to hang off of, you have to start building other things just to hold the cables, and it can get very complicated.
So Joe, can you talk a little bit about, so the audience understands the power of governmental agencies, and basically if they want to, they can just immediately put some demands on you, correct?
Yes, I mean, in general, they don't. Obviously, there's a large amount of property owners, and you make them spend money, rents go up. So there is some pushback from the populace. But New York City had implemented a program for bowstring trusses 10 years ago or so, similar to Local Law 11, where they required them all to get inspected, and the costs to inspect them and repair them was so much that they ended up kind of abandoning that program. So there can be situations where they overreach, but in general, the building codes don't make you go back and update things every time the code changes or fix things or modernize things. It's only when there really needs to be a safety hazard or some sort of danger to make somebody work on an existing building.
But it seems to me like city officials have an elevated sense of danger now, right? Than they did before, correct?
Surfside, absolutely. Yeah, it's not just the officials. I mean, I had plenty of clients that I've worked with for years who fought tooth and nail every time I told them they had to spend money on their buildings. And 2 days after Surfside, they were calling me saying, we need to fix this, we need to fix that. What can we do? So I think everybody kind of got a wake up call to what can happen if you ignore things you shouldn't be ignoring.
Yeah, I mean, right. I think a couple of places where the people are probably more susceptible is places like Newark, places like Fort Lee, other areas along the Gold Coast, Hoboken, places where the buildings are built to the property line, and so literally people are walking by every single day and something could fall on their head. you know, if you're talking about a town where there's a little bit more land involved, and so there's more grassy areas and people are a little bit more distance from the facade, you're probably less likely to have something like this come down on you. I'm not saying I can guarantee that, but probably less likely.
Yeah, the likelihood of a person being under it when it fall, you know, a single brick falling in a building in a field, it's very unlikely it's going to hit anybody. But you're absolutely right. In Hoboken or Jersey City, you know, the sidewalk, there's a good chance someone's going to be there. So.
But Scott, I'm getting reports like these government officials, they're all on it right now, right? If anything falls off the building. So one question to you is, at what point, when do things start falling off the building, right? Because that seems to be a lot of feedback that I'm hearing, where all of a sudden the governmental agencies come in, is somebody's reported something has fallen on the sidewalk. Where's the middle ground from a maintenance point where somebody like yourself can go in and prevent that from happening?
Well, I mean, you know, so that's a hard question to ask because all these buildings are built with different sorts of materials, different ages. You know, the thing is, like, if you really step back and think about it, there is no law out there that says you're required to fix anything on the exterior of your building at any point in time. I mean, outside of this Jersey City thing, right? So most of the time people don't do it until something starts to fall off and or you're starting to get bad leaks into your building, or it's something a little bit more major. And usually at that point in time, it's a large project with a lot of things wrong with your building. Your caulk joints are failed. You have cracks in your mortar joints, bricks are spalled, concrete's failing. Maybe some of your balconies need a lot of work, things like that. Because there's nothing forcing you to do that, and people don't want to spend the money on this stuff because it's not fun and sexy. It's not like you know, something you get to enjoy. It's not a new kitchen or a new bathroom in your house. It's something on the exterior of the building, and it's a little less fun to spend the money on that kind of stuff.
So Joe, I'm hoping maybe you could kind of reinforce with the audience the importance of getting ahead of problems and having an inspection done so they don't reach the point where they have debris start falling.
Well, yeah, I mean, these problems are progressive problems. You know, a lot of structural problems are something gets loaded and it breaks. But, you know, soil settlement and facade and parking garage corrosion is progressive. It's the weather is a huge part of it. So as it continues to get rained on, continues to see freeze thaw cycles, continue to have salt dropping off of car tires on the parking garages, it only gets worse over time. So, you know, people don't want to spend the money up front to maintain and to seal these cracks and to put, you know, different methods of preventing the weathering from getting to the important parts of the building. They don't want to spend the money on that, and then in the end, exactly what Scott described is what's happened. They end up having to spend significantly more, and not in a way where they can plan for it. I mean, it's, you know, it's one thing to plan to spend X amount of dollars on maintenance on a facade per year to make sure you're not going to have a big problem and budget for it. It's another thing to have the city come in and say you have to evacuate your building tomorrow unless you spend $1 million. So, you know, that's not a good situation to be in.
So question from the audience, I'll throw this at you, Joe. They're asking, is it a fact that there's new regulations in place, or is it really that governmental agencies are more in looking at the current regulations and enforcing them?
The Jersey City thing is a regulation that was adopted by the council. That was an ordinance that the city council put in place. There are no, the building code itself that's adopted statewide and to some degree nationally, there is nothing in there, you know, that there's property maintenance codes and things like that, but there's nothing that requires facade inspections or structural inspections of buildings on any kind of regular basis.
So I know you don't have a crystal ball, but it seems to me this is definitely going to end up being a trend, I think. Correct?
I think it would trend. Yeah, I think it's going to trend towards more of this, not less of it. Yes. How that all plays out, I don't know. I mean, it's very specific to the type of building and where it's located. I mean, you can have a wood frame building in Kansas and you know, that's, you worry about tornadoes there, but you know, a concrete frame building on the coast in New Jersey exposed to salt air, that's a whole different thing. But if you had a glass curtain wall, brand new building that was a steel frame on the coast in New Jersey, you don't worry about those things. So it depends on both the materials and the type of the building and where it is.
And then Scott, Scott, I don't think people understand also a lot of these problems are preventable, like in the case of like where people put things on their railings, right? They cover their railings and then their railing almost acts like a sail and it starts to vibrate. And like there's a lot of issues here that an inspection or someone like Joe or yourself could really get ahead of, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, number one, preventative maintenance is always important. Everything has a life cycle, all materials, right? So they don't last for forever. And it's hard to put a number on like what that is, because it really depends on the material and what it's constructed of. But I mean, there's a reason why some of these inspections are every 5 years, right? Because I would say, most of the time your materials are probably going to fall somewhere in a 7 to 12 year life cycle before they need to be replaced, maintained, whatever. So there's certain membranes that you can put on to protect your stuff and prevent water from getting in and make them last longer. And a lot of times what happens is people don't put them in the beginning. They wait till they have major problems, and then they end up doing this after they perform the repair. So essentially you paid for the thing you would have done anyway, but you spent the money on the repairs. And that's the thing I always try and force people to see is you end up spending more money down the road because you're going to do this thing anyway, right? You're going to maintain that caulk that's allowing the water to get in, but what you're going to do is you're going to fix the more major problem that happened, and then you're going to fix the caulk too.
So Joe, what are we really trying to push to the audience today? What are we trying to push here? What action are we trying to get them to
I think the theme that's developing here, and it's organic because it wasn't planned, but I mean, Scott and I are kind of keep coming back to the same thing. The money to spend on having these things checked and maintained is well worth it. And, it's a lot easier to control. It's a lot easier to budget for. It's a lot easier to plan for. And in the end, it's likely a lot cheaper. But, people don't have the foresight and they just see, oh, I don't want to spend that money right now. And they say that 10 years in a row. And then next thing you know, they have no choice but to spend double what they would have spent.
Scott, do you think people underestimate, managers and boards, how expensive these projects can become?
I think they actually have no idea how expensive it is and how expensive it can become, because there's so many factors that go into an exterior facade. We were talking about the bridging, we were talking about the difficulty of the scaffolding, then we're talking about all the different repairs that could have to be done throughout the facade and how much of it. So I think it's hard for somebody to even wrap their mind around what that is. They don't know what it costs. This is a very elusive thing that people I can't tell if I'm gonna have to spend hundreds of thousands or a couple of $1 million. They have no idea. And that's the biggest challenge. But the thing is, look, there are other ways to approach it. It's nice to be able to do one big, large project all in one shot, and sometimes it's more cost effective to do that. But the other thing you could do is you can start to separate a project into certain elevations maybe, and start to budget out and do it in smaller phases if it's too much of an expense to bite off one large chunk at a time, right? But most of the time what people do is, when they don't have the money to do the entire thing, they just put it off and do nothing, and then those problems become even worse and then more costly to fix.
And there is a worst case scenario. It's rare, but I mean, there was a building I looked at probably about 10 years ago on the coast at the Jersey Shore. It was a concrete building on the beach block, had some pretty significant deterioration, and we gave them a proposal to do an investigation and design repairs and things, and they didn't hire us. I don't know where it went from there, but this summer that building got condemned and shut down and everyone kicked out, and essentially all those condos are worthless at this point until they figure out what they're going to do. So I mean, that's the ultimate, that's not just the management and the association that has a problem. Now you have a bunch of unit owners whose value just crashed. So I'm not trying to scare people. That's very rare, as I said, but that can happen.
Well, just to piggyback off of that, if you don't mind, right? So but there are unexpected things that pop up, right? So I mean, there's the project itself that you need to do, but you always need to be factoring in some sort of a contingency, because there are things that get identified at another point in time that you couldn't have known about up front. And I'll give you an example. I'm working on a project right now. Again, this one's at the Jersey Shore, and I'm fixing these balconies. And while we were working on it, we ended up realizing that the balconies, for whatever the reason is, when they replaced the railings, the contractor who installed them, now the plates are fastened into the concrete, and there's 4 bolts in each post, right? And on every balcony, they were missing a number of bolts that were never installed from the get-go. We have no idea why, but I mean, some of the balconies were missing 20 bolts on one balcony of maybe 16 railings. So what's the math? 16 times 4, that's 40, that's 64. They're missing 20 bolts. I mean, that's a safety concern that nobody even knew existed before we started working on the project.
So I think for me, Joe and Scott, I am trying to scare people a little bit because I'm hearing a lot of reports where you really don't want these inspectors coming in and telling you that you have to put scaffolding up. I mean, at that point, it's almost too late. And also, I'm trying to kind of reinforce the whole point about the importance of inspections. So I'll go to Scott for closing thoughts, and also if I'm on track a little bit with some of my comments, and then I'll go to Joe last.
Yeah, I mean, listen, absolutely. It's always important to inspect your facade. You know, really, I think you got to take into account how old is your building? When was the last time that you inspected it or performed any major renovation to the exterior of it? And if you can't think of it and your building is probably 20 plus years old, I mean, you definitely need to get on that now. I'm sure there's a lot of things, especially if it's a concrete or masonry building that are in need of some sort of maintenance. But certainly the sooner you get on it, the less costly it's going to be, because you know, these when problems happen, they don't happen you know, in a 1 + 1 = 2. It's more of a 2 × 2 = 4. They grow exponentially in the severity and in the cost to repair them.
And then Dawn, I'd like you to jump back on here just so at the very end. So Joe, closing thoughts, and also wanted to ask you, am I off track here? Because I am trying to have boards and managers get a little bit concerned about getting ahead of some of these problems.
Well, I think the other thing that we can do as engineers, and you know, the boards can hire good people, good engineers to come and look at the building, see what kind of building it is, how old it is, what the exposures are to the environment, what kind of conditions it's in, and we can help the board plan that maintenance and inspections going forward. I mean, you may have a building that I say you don't need to look at for 10 years. You may have another one that I say every 3 months, or you got to do repairs, and anything in between. But just because you have a building that's exposed to the weather doesn't mean that these things are going to happen. But the engineers are the people that should be making those decisions and planning it out, and also taking the liability off of the board. That's another thing that maybe David could talk about later. But you know, the whole concept of boards' responsibilities is going to change in the wake of Surfside, and there's potential litigation or legislation on that also.
And Ray, I mean, if you don't mind me just commenting on that, you know, real quick, you know, so going back to what Joe was saying, you know, you do want to hire an engineer who can give you some sort of cost estimates to anticipate for some of these things, because from my end as a contractor, one of the biggest holdups from starting any project is the finances. Most of the time, people are not being charged enough money up front as part of their HOA fees, because high HOA fees are actually detrimental to the sale of the units, right? But what's happening is they're not putting enough money aside, and then when the project is ready to come to fruition, they don't have the money. They have to go out and get bank loans, and you know, a lot of times each owner is assessed somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000 or $15,000. That's not an uncommon amount of money. So the thing is, like, you know, you do want to be able to get ahead of this stuff and be able to plan for it, because sometimes that can delay a project for months.
Yeah, Scott and I were involved in a project years ago that just kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed, and they desperately needed repairs, and they were fighting and arguing about who was paying for what and where they were getting the money from, and it went on for years while the building just continued to deteriorate, and that happens a lot.
So I have to leave it there. If anyone from the audience also wants more information, just send me comments or send me an email afterwards, and I'll connect you with either Joe or Scott, and I'm sure they'll be able to provide you with any additional information. Dawn, real quick, because we're short on time, but any insurance issues in regard to facades?
Lots. So I heard a lot of discussion about the geographic location, the proximity to other buildings. Insurance as a whole, we are always looking at that location. Where is the building? When was it built? But updates are becoming more concerning to our underwriters. So as the gentlemen were speaking to, reserve studies are becoming something that us insurance agents are asking for on a daily basis. We want not only to see the reserve study, but are you following the reserve study? Sometimes the funding isn't always available, so there may be special assessments, but are you following along with the projected capital improvements as they are supposed to be occurring?
Awesome. And then just so the audience knows, there's a couple YouTube channels. If you go to Association Help Now, click on the YouTube link. There's even a live stream link, but both Scott and Joe have a couple videos on there. Scott's video is very popular. It's very long, but it's extremely popular, and people watch the entire hour long. It's a lot of photos, but they're two great videos. Joe, you're going to catch up. Your videos hasn't been on as long as Scott, so don't worry. All right, so Tom, come on back up. I'm going to keep Joe and Scott and Dawn here. Tom is going to help us do a giveaway to our audience. So don't say anything yet, Tom, but first introduce who you are and what you do, because you're just here basically to give away a gift card to someone in the audience.
My name is Tom Ashola again. I'm glad to be here. Thank you. We specialize in fire prevention services. We do chimney repairs, cleaning, inspections. We also do dry vent cleaning and inspections, as well as air duct cleaning for both commercial and residential.
All right, so you are going to play, Tom, on behalf of someone at random. And Dave, if you want to come on and play the game, yeah, come on. Sure, you can help out. So Dave Byrne's going to join us too. He sent me a text. So the panel is going to make some suggestions. So audience, what I would like you is send in right now, heat blank. And what's going to happen is Tom's going to have to match what the audience overwhelmingly ends up picking. And the answers are coming in right now. So audience, it's important to send your answers in. So thank you so much. I'm going to give, and I'm going to pick someone at random. So Tom, why don't you pick somebody 1 through 45 for me?
26.
Okay. So you're going to play for Rachel V. So we'll see how Tom does for you, Rachel V. The answers are coming in. All right. We're going to move quickly here. Joe, what is your suggestion? What do you think is going to be a popular answer? Heat what?
Duct.
Heat duct. Okay. Scott?
Heat blanket.
Heat blanket does not sound very.
That's a construction thing, okay? It's completely wrong, but it's a construction thing, a heat blanket.
Okay. All right. I don't know about that one. Dawn? Oh, Dawn even wrote it down. Heat wave. All right, Dave, do you want to throw another one out there?
Yeah, miser.
What?
Miser.
What do you think? I guess based on our audience, it could make sense, but okay. All right. So Tom,
People know what heat miser is. Trust me.
okay. All right. So Tom, I could tell you that the audience did overwhelmingly pick one answer over another. There was a close second. Your job for HOV is to pick which one the audience picked the most. Tom, are you going to go with what the panel suggested or are you going to come up with your own?
No, I'm going to go with what Dawn had said. I had heat wave.
All right. And I will tell you that heat wave was the overwhelmingly response. There was heat detector, there was heat exchange, there was heat stroke, and there was a whole bunch of other ones. I'm sorry, Scott, but there was no heat blanket. And I'm sorry, Dave, there was absolutely no heat. Was it miser or riser? I don't even know.
Miser.
Okay. All right. Awesome.
You're without
Well,
a Santa Claus.
And if you need any duct cleaning done, call Tom from Apex. Correct, Tom? Because that's you only jump on. I like you to do a commercial because you only jump on to give away gift cards. So
Can
Thank
I
you
speak
for having me.
from an insurance perspective? Dryer fires are one of the most common experiences for fires in a residential unit. So having your dryer vent cleaned annually is very essential.
is that where you are at parties too, Dawn? When these games come up and you're at a party with all your friends and someone brings up a
So
topic
much
like,
fun.
yeah, just bring up an insurance issue to tell everyone. All right, so I'm going to have everybody jump off except for Dawn. And Joe and Scott, I know you guys both said that you guys have to run, so thanks for being here. And I have all their contact information, audience. So Dawn, we're going to talk just a little bit about insurance underwriting, but I have a poll, and the poll is: do you have a proactive plan to reduce future insurance premiums? That is an interesting question because I don't even if something like that even exists. But let's see. So Dawn, how do you think the audience is going to answer?
I think the answer would be yes for most of the boards. I think that they're going to say that they're taking a risk management approach. They may be looking at, oh, the answer is no. Oh, no.
No, and I actually think it was actually no much more before I ended up closing it. So obviously, Dawn, you are surprised about that answer, right?
Well, it means that we insurance agents have a lot more work to do out there to spread some of the messages about some of the ways that our community association boards can reduce their risk and to maintain their risk and their premiums along with that. So today we're going to talk about underwriting changes, and we have a lot. You know, the gentleman before us talked a lot about structural integrity of buildings and about laws and legislation that is coming, and we are seeing it. And building inspections. So what those gentlemen were speaking to was some of the requirements that local authorities such as Jersey City has enacted in connection with the inspection of your buildings, depending upon the construction of your buildings as well as the age. Those building inspection reports are going to be requested by our insurance carriers. In fact, among other inspection reports such as sprinkler reports and perhaps maintenance of some of the other fire systems, will want to see these inspection reports as to when was the building inspected and were there any deficiencies. If there were deficiencies, our insurance underwriters want to know, what did you do to correct those issues? So the gentleman mentioned that when the board delays doing the work that's necessary, it often increases the cost of that work. It also can increase the risk that you have from a liability perspective, because if the project is delayed, you may see a breach of contract claim from your contractor. You may see litigation from members of the association who want to force board members into action or prevent them from doing something. And we may, of course, see in the moment where boards trying to cut corners, that may increase the risk, meaning that the workmanship may not be as acceptable, or they may take contractors without contracts who may not have sufficient insurance.
Okay, so let's keep breaking it down into little pieces so we make sure everyone can follow along. So going back to the poll question, the audience is asking me, I guess they feel like they didn't get an answer to that. Can having a proactive plan reduce future insurance premiums?
So the building, one of the biggest things with insurance is we want to make sure you're maintaining your buildings. We don't want to insure buildings that are on fire or falling apart. So what we're looking to is, are you maintaining the buildings? Provide us with the updates, provide us with inspection reports. And then from an insurance perspective, as far as premium, what risk is the association willing to take on? So looking at deductible structures. Our insurance carriers are increasing the deductibles, particularly for wind. We are seeing changes from deductibles being per occurrence to per building, per unit, and of course, the percentage of the total insured value. So boards can look to estimate what their cost may be by working with the insurance agent to see if there's different options for increased deductibles, as well as blanketing some insurance, etc.
Okay, so increased deductibles, I think most of the audience already knows if you increase your deductible, that, you know, it's going to help your insurance premium. But what you're saying is inspection reports, they will pay off if the insurance underwriter can be provided with reports from the association that says, look, we've done all these inspections. Let's start with that first. That can cause a reduction in premium.
Well, it's not that it may cause a reduction in premium, but it's going to get you to the top of the list with the insurance carrier. Meaning that when the insurance underwriters are looking to provide a quote and to be competitive, they want to make sure that the board is making the proper steps to prevent some type of claims from occurring in the future. Most of that starts with, of course, maintaining the buildings. So how does the board expect to pay for that? How are they funding? Are they funded? Are they a poor financial risk? So financials and looking at what are they reserving? How much are they reserving? And of course, claims history. The board that is really involved in the process and the claims and looking to reduce future claims. That, of course, will impact our premium.
So as far as providing an underwriter with a future plan,
Mhm.
do they really care about that? About like outside the inspection reports that are actually current? If you,
Yes,
does that
they
matter?
do. Especially if you have an association where there have been prior claims, the underwriters want to know, what are you going to mitigate, or what are you going to do to change circumstances so if this occurs in the future, someone is not injured as much, or the property damage is not as severe. So for example, if we're in a coastal community and the windows now need to be replaced, will you be putting in hurricane shutters and window impact resistant windows? Is your roof updated? A lot of our insurance carriers are no longer providing replacement cost valuation on roofs that are older than 15 years.
So the audience is also asking, so basically, and a couple people asked this, so I'm going to rephrase it. They're saying, you're basically saying if you show the insurance company you learned your lesson, that it could go a long way and
It
reduce,
can.
right?
Yes, because that's really, a lot of times with claims, it's what did we learn? You know, Dave, who has an amazing knowledge and expertise in law, will talk about precedent and he will talk about cases. So what did we learn from that claim or that litigation that occurred? What can we do to make our community more safe in the future? What did we learn from that lawsuit? How can we be more proactive to prevent those claims from occurring in the future?
So the audience is asking, what kind of format should this be in? Because this seems to be something new that I'm hearing, where you actually kind of communicate to the underwriter that, hey, this is what happened this is what has happened in the past, and this is what we're not going to make sure. This is what we're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again in the future. So how would that be best communicated so it has an impact?
So I have to say, one of the biggest challenges that I think myself and other insurance agents have is when we're coming into a community brand new, is to know the historical data on claims as well as building updates. I would recommend that community association boards keep a historical type of worksheet that describes the year that the buildings were updated, along with any list of claims that have occurred, and when the claim occurred, what did the association do, or what can the association do to prevent the claim from occurring in the future?
All right, so Dave, I'd like you to jump on also, just so you're set up for the next segment.
Now, along with that, while Dave's getting on, one of the other questions that a lot of underwriters ask us is, what work will be performed in the future? What large projects do you anticipate? And if you do have projects, will your contractors be providing you with proof of insurance? Often we will ask for a copy of the contract. We want to review the insurance requirements of the contract to make sure that that contractor is providing to the association the minimum insurance requirements of that contract.
All right, so Dawn, I want to wrap up closing thoughts, but just general. Go again, once again, what are the underwriter changes? What are they looking for now that they never used to look for before? And then we obviously learned a bunch of new stuff also.
Yes, so our underwriters are truly looking for boards that do risk management. The boards are the risk manager. They can take out an insurance policy to transfer some of that risk, or they can obtain the risk, meaning that they don't need to obtain insurance. They can use another vehicle to transfer the risk. So contracts are essential right now, as well as the updates for the buildings, to show the insurance carriers that you are taking care of the buildings and you truly have a vested interest in the future of the association.
Awesome. And then what I also learned today is it doesn't hurt to let the insurance company know what you are going to change in the future so you do not relive the past. And it looks like we have a little bit of a connection issue with Dawn. All right. Well, thank you, Dawn. Don't go anywhere. We may have some insurance questions after Dave's segment. All right, Dave, I have a poll for the audience. You're going to talk about legal emergencies. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like this could be even abused by boards sometimes, but let's see what happens. First, the poll question is going to be, to get us started, are you liable for the bad actions you took on your own in an emergency? So you feel there's an emergency, you're the president, you need to make a decision, you don't have time to check in with anybody else, and you go ahead and you pull the trigger. And I'm curious to see what the audience is going to think. And then Dave's going to give us the right answer. And I'm letting that come in a little bit because there's like 4 answers there. So are you liable for bad actions you took on your own? And it's no matter what. Yes, if you were not allowed to act alone. Yes, no matter what. And no, you were not allowed to act alone. I'm going to close the poll. So Dave, how do you think the audience answered? And then I'll share it.
I would say the audience probably went with the second one, which was if you were not allowed to act alone.
Wow, Dave, I'm very impressed. 67% said that you are liable for bad actions if you were not allowed to act alone. Okay, so why don't we jump to that first, Dave? We'll go a little out of order here. What is the correct answer?
Well, typical lawyer fashion, it's not that simple, but the poll respondents' instincts are pretty good in terms of the way they probably view the answer, which is if you were not allowed to act alone, to me means you weren't authorized to do something and you went outside the scope of what it would be to be a board member. That's probably what people instinctively gravitated towards. And in that instance, there would be liability. But at the risk of having a longer answer, ultimately, the question really isn't whether an individual is liable for something they do or don't do, because the answer is probably yes. The real question is whether or not the person will ever have to go into his or her own pocket to pay anyone. And the answer to that is almost impossible. It's incredibly unlikely that would ever happen. So even if a person was not even authorized to make the decision on his or her own or take the action on his or her own, as long as it was done in good faith and was reasonable, the association ultimately would have to cover any amount of money that the board member was responsible to pay.
Okay, so let's start off with the basics here. And I think this is actually a hard question. What is considered an emergency from the perspective of a board and manager? And I'd also like to ask you, Dave, does it matter that perspective if it's from a board or a manager, or does it work the same for both?
Well, that's a good question. The second part of your question is pretty probative, because the manager aspect creates an additional layer because of a contract. So, the manager may have additional obstacles before he or she can do something because of a contractual limitation. And so that may make things a little different. So that would have to be analyzed. As to what's an emergency, I mean, the general definition, I guess, is, potential danger or active danger to person or property. But I don't know that it really matters. In some instances, actions can be taken without a formal board vote. In some instances, they can't. There are some emergencies that still require a board vote, whether it's emergency or not. So it really would depend on the situation. It's not like, like a government might do more recently than before, just declare an emergency and then do whatever you want. Even in that context, an emergency might still require some actions to be taken in accordance with the board vote.
All right, so the audience is asking me to ask you for an example, which lawyers absolutely hate doing, but I'm going to do it anyway. So
no, it's okay.
Here's an example I'm going to come up with, an easy one. Well, let me throw one at you, and then you can throw a different one. There's a hole in the roof, right? All of a sudden, there's a water storm, water's collecting, and this becomes this hole in the roof, and it's an immediate problem. It has to be solved, and a vendor has to be called out for an extraordinary amount of money, and the president can't get in touch with anyone else, or it's just the manager. Is that an emergency? And then feel free to give your own example.
Well, I think it's definitely an emergency, sure. It's definitely an emergency. And the annoying factor there would be the management company has some contractual and fiduciary duty to protect against damage that's coming from that hole in the roof, as you say. And the contract may have limitations on the management company's ability to deal with it if the amount of money involved is of a certain, if the amount of money involved is large enough, and the management company may not be able to then act without a board involvement. As to the board vote aspect of it, though, my view has been and remains that when a board adopts a budget, when a board signs a management contract, when a board adopts general sort of policies and procedures with dealing with holes in the roof or emergencies, it has in fact acted. So if the board's policy is to make sure that when a hole in the roof happens, people don't die and damage doesn't get worse, that's the board's policy. So if there's only one board member that's available to take a phone call, then that's just the way it's going to be. And then arguably then, even if a board member is not available, the manager may have to act. But what a management company or a manager will do and will not do and can and cannot do is in a lot of ways dependent upon the contract. So from a management's perspective, I think they would need to take a step back, consult the contract and the policies that were created in relation to the contract. From the board's perspective, my view is that sort of the general policy has already been adopted, which is that the association has to make sure things don't get worse when there's a hole in the roof. And if only one board member is available to decide whether to hire the guy for $50,000, that's just the way it is. That the guy has to be hired. The guy has, the board has to vote. The individual board member has to vote that way.
So someone from the audience has another good one, and then we'll move on. The elevator goes down, and that is obviously an emergency because we need for health reasons if there's a health emergency on one of the floors. But and let's say the manager, now I'm adding, the manager can't get in touch with anyone or the board member, and the elevator company says, look, this is a critical repair. It's going to cost you 50 grand right now for whatever reason, but they don't have time to get together a board meeting. Is that considered an emergency, or is that something that's going to get that manager or board member in trouble? Because theoretically it could wait.
Well, yeah, it can wait. So therefore, some of the impediments of that would be removed in a previous example would still be there, because there are a couple different layers to this. The first is board decisions are not supposed to be made absent a board meeting that's open to attendance of owners, following certain notice, which is generally 7 days. But the law allows for emergency meetings, which so they can take place instantly. But even under the current law in New Jersey, at least, you can, if you're talking about an elevator, so the condominium is one building, let's say. Under the current law, you could put a notice up in the lobby and say 10 minutes from now, we're having a board meeting and we're going to be voting on that. So if that's not followed, there's potential culpability because the rules weren't followed as to how that decision gets made. The problem, though, is in the end, and I'm talking from the board's perspective, because again, managers and management companies have a different dynamic here because of the contract. But from the board's perspective, there isn't really any substantive liability to prematurely voting or prematurely fixing the elevator at $15,000 more than what you should have spent. I mean, it's not like the individual board member is going to have to go to the ATM and go get money and pay someone back. I mean, the consequence of the decision is going to be that the association spent more money, and therefore an owner can get a judge to rule that it was handled improperly. But what's the point? I mean, there's no money that's going to change hands. The elevator guy's not giving you money back. So nothing really comes of it. So it's the real problem would be if you don't act and somebody gets hurt, then there could be an actual financial loss. But to act and spend more money than you would have spent otherwise because you acted too quickly, it's not really going to translate into much of value to an owner who would be complaining that you acted too quickly. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and there's actually one more, I think, that is an interesting one. Someone is I'm going to make it a little bit shorter. Someone's making a comment about how they had to hire security at the last minute. I guess they had an issue where they had to prevent someone to have entry from the building, and there was no time to get anyone else together to get them on the phone, and they just went out and I guess hired security or hired off-duty police, which could turn out to be expensive. Now, Dave, and then we're going to stop with the examples, but would that be considered
Yeah.
an emergency?
Okay.
Because
I mean, it depends. I mean, a lot of people, they had to hire security because someone was coming to the building. I mean, that's a very subjective thing. People are afraid of different things. So I don't know if it's an emergency, but it wouldn't really matter because the emergency would only be relevant to the time within which the decision was made, because the board theoretically has the decision to hire security whenever it wants, whether it's dumb or not, you know. So the question really is about emergency, which means that they have the right to do it without having a vote, I guess. I mean, if that's the real question, I don't know. But then it depends on who's they. So the managers go ahead and spend $5,000 on security because he or she was afraid. I mean, I don't know. It would depend on the situation, and that would be more of a concern for the management company. If that were the facts, I gather the board would be a little annoyed that it was expected to pay the $5,000.
I think what we're talking about here, Dave, is also from the questions I'm seeing in the comments. It is about individual board members and managers having to make decisions. They don't have time to get together, you know, the entire board. So let's just talk about best practices. You're a board member, you're a manager, there's an emergency. It's going to cost a considerable amount of money. You got to make a decision. What should they try to do? Even though I think you're saying they should just take action anyway, but what would be the best practices for them?
The best practice is to set up a policy, chain of command kind of thing, you know, a way in which decisions get made. And if the board adopts an overall sort of policy and procedure, and you follow that, you do remove all of the questions about board meetings and stuff. Because the argument is that the board already voted. The board already voted to create a policy so that the manager has the right to do this. The secretary has the right to do that, or the board member who's the liaison to the manager has the right to make this decision. If you've created all those decisions and they've already been adopted, then you're completely free, in my view, of any argument that the board failed to vote on something. Because the obligation is not on the board to vote on the individual thing every day that happens, you know, whether to mop the floor over here or mop the floor over there. You know, the board's decision is to hire someone to decide when and where to mop the floor. So if you've adopted a policy that governs how to handle emergencies, then you're clear, as far as I'm concerned, with all the board decision nuances. Does the board have to get together and vote, and does there have to be notice and all these kinds of things? And if you get past that, then as long as the procedure is followed, I don't see how there's any issue, even if you end up spending more money. But again, even if you spend more money, no one's hurt by it. Like there's no damage to a board decision to overspend to fix something. Maybe someone's assessments go up, but I mean, they're not going to file a lawsuit for that. And even if they do, you know, what's going to happen?
Well, Dawn, I'd like you to jump back on. Dave, what happens though if the decision is the wrong decision and it causes additional injury? A board or manager, they're on their own, there's no one around, a hurricane's on the way, they make a decision and it was the absolutely wrong decision, but they thought it was the best decision.
It wouldn't matter in that scenario because the people aren't responsible for wrong decisions. They're responsible for decisions they didn't have the right to make and that they made in bad faith. So it wouldn't make a difference. If the board's adopted a policy that allows, in your example, that allows someone to, there's a hurricane coming and I have to go to Home Depot and buy plywood and board up the windows. And it turns out that I read the weather report from the previous year and the hurricane came last year, not this year. That was the wrong decision, clearly, and it was pretty negligent, frankly. But there's no liability for it because you were authorized to do it, and you didn't do it because your brother-in-law owned Home Depot and you wanted to give him a couple $1,000. I mean, you know, so the wrong decision is not really the key. Wrong decisions are made all the time, and you're not responsible for wrong decisions. You're responsible for decisions that you didn't have the right to make and that you made in bad faith. That's pretty much a general concept.
So I'm going to give Dave the last closing thoughts on this, Dawn, but before we do, and we're short on time here. Talk a little bit about D&O. Dave's talking about, because some of this would fall under D&O, right? A board member or a manager, let's say, makes the wrong decision on their own, and someone gets hurt. Let's go with the worst case scenario.
So directors and officers, what I want to be clear on, directors and officers does not provide coverage for bodily injury or property damage claims. So if the board makes a decision that results in property damage or bodily injury to somebody else, that will be the general liability policy that will respond. General liability and D&O policies are typically a duty to defend policy, which means that they will have the duty to defend you as soon as you tell them that there is a claim until something is excluded in the policy or the claim has been closed.
And you made the assumption, Dawn, that we were talking about the entire board making the decision. I keep bouncing us back to the manager or board member on their own. They can't get in touch with anyone. Something has happened. Would your answer also apply?
Well, so I say board because the manager is the extension of the board. The manager is acting at the direction or at the capacity or the permission that's granted through the contract from the board. So when the manager is making decisions, we assume that that is the authorization granted as an extension of the board, their administrative arm potentially. Most general liability and directors and officers policies will provide coverage for the manager acting on behalf of the association. So if the manager is personally named in a lawsuit, the insurance policy should have an endorsement where the liability coverage will pick up the defense of the manager as well as the indemnification.
All right, so Dave, take us out of this segment and kind of wrap it up, keeping in mind there was a couple different trains of thought here. And also, by the way, I thought it was interesting, Dave, how many associations do you find actually have a chain of command laid out and put on paper? Is that common, Dave, or not common?
I think it's probably uncommon, but I do think that in most instances, at least with condominiums and HOAs that are managed through a professional independent management company and not a direct employee, in a lot of ways the management contract becomes the policies and procedures vis-a-vis emergencies, because as Dawn I think correctly stated, the board, the management company is sort of like the the administrative arm of the board. It has had powers delegated to it, and if the management company's done a good job with its contract and the like, it's going to delineate when the management company is obligated to act, and frankly when the manager is not obligated to act because they don't want to be responsible for something that a board has not has refused to do.
So Dave, is that your closing thoughts on this, or do you want to add anything before we wrap up for today?
I would say that and bringing Dawn back in was a good approach, because I think one of the important things that I'm talking about, again, so I'm going to focus on board members for this purpose, because again, managers, it's more unique because there's a contract involved, but in the end, there's a question of liability. Like, if I do something wrong, will someone sue me and I'll lose? And that's possible, and in this country, people get sued all the time, and oftentimes for no reason. But that's separate and apart from whether the board member will actually ever have to pay any money. And when you or when someone asks, can I be liable for this? Well, the politician lawyer answers yes, because if you do something, you can be sued, and a jury could rule you did something wrong and you have to pay. But the association will have to pay it for you, and or the insurance company may have to pay it for you, depending upon the nature of the claim. So the question of can I be liable for something is there's really a nuance to it, because yes, you can be liable for quite almost anything you do, because that's the way the country's structured. If you do something, you should be responsible for it. But you may not have to actually pay your own money. And that's, in a lot of ways, what people are really asking when they're asking, can I be liable for this? They really want to know, am I going to have to sell my house to pay someone off because of a decision I made not to fix the elevator? So I would say that's really what I had to sum up and make sure board members try to understand there's a difference between the two.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both for being here. Also, Joe and Scott and Tom. If the audience has any questions, go ahead and email it to me and I'll forward it to one of our panelists and get you back some answers. Thank you so much for being here and enjoy the rest of your day and hope to see everybody next time. Bye.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.